Russ, I recall how intense the period was when we were pulling all the materials together to bring hundreds of people into a room for a couple of days. And there's a lot of effort that goes into that. And not to mention, we've all got our own lives, we've all got other issues in our personal situation. There's lots of other projects that we're working on. For me, I went through a bit of a roller coaster in how tough. We're doing really deep thinking here, big, bold, deep thinking. And I find that sort of mental gymnastics is really tiring. And I know I went through periods of time where I felt disappointment with little things that weren't quite going as fast as I would like them. And I went on a bit of a roller coaster myself. And I knew that to get myself back off that roller coaster and back into it, I was grateful for the colleagues that were around me and the various networks and opportunities to go and meet with other people. I sort of always felt like it put the wind beneath my wings again. And I'm like, right, I am on the right track. I know this is going to work. We are going to get through this together. It's tough and the fog is starting to clear, was how I felt as I was going through all of this. From your perspective, I know I was putting pressure on you and the team. Yeah. We had deadlines looming. This was not the only project you're working on.
Yeah.
What do you think about that sort of roller coaster of leadership and how people might be able to take some heart from how we dealt with that to get through and successfully to the end and, not to the end, to the beginning of a new chapter and, then work on things like you're doing now. That whole leadership fatigue issue, and what words of encouragement would you give?
Yeah, I mean, the idea, this thing of fatigue, and particularly, and it's well recognized, fatigue of people that have been working in this climate change, disaster context. It's emotionally exhausting because every day we see things unfolding that the scenarios we developed in the AVP back in 2017, 2018, many of those scenarios have played out.
Yep.
And we know that things are only going to get worse. And yet we still struggle to get that real recognition and buy-in and support for change. And so it does.
Do you think that's the leadership fatigue thingy at all sorts of scales of taking the path of least resistance because it is so hard and foggy and complex?
Oh, look, I know a lot of people, particularly in the research area, that shifted entirely out of this area of research because it's so difficult. And so taking and I think this is one of those challenges. It's part of the fatigue, but it's also where you get your strength because you're then surrounded by people who are in this area, who are so passionate and so motivated and are so willing to invest so much of their lives, because it is so important. And so you get the strength from those like-minded people. You form these coalitions. I think that was a key part of it. But I think the other thing that's made makes this work quite draining is a big part of the job of work that we needed to do in the AVP, and in fact it's in all the projects that we now do, is we've got this understanding, this new knowledge. It's knowledge about novel changes that we know are likely to play out, and we have to introduce that into decision-making processes where we have sets of existing priorities, highly constrained environments, and it's going to require people to engage in what's important to them, what values and tensions and trade-offs that are likely to play out, the potential for loss and damage and harm and suffering. And that's exhausting emotion. It's draining. You have intense conversations with people, and especially in a disaster space where a lot of the people have experienced that themselves. And so when I was asked to facilitate these workshops, one of the things we had to be very cognizant of was obviously bringing in the science that was credible, but being very sensitive to the fact that people were sometimes themselves experiencing certain triggers, emotional triggers, psychological triggers, and also starting to have to confront some real challenges in their work environment that they recognized suddenly that they needed to be doing more, but they couldn't because they were so constrained. And so creating an environment in a workshop setting that people felt safe in to show their vulnerabilities, to talk about these issues, was a really important part of, I think, the success of the whole process. And so, I mean, a big part of the design of the workshop with all these really smart people factored all of that in. And the job for me was to try and just create that environment where people felt safe. And we were sensitive and responsive, and we could stop and allow people to just to have time to think, talk, and feel safe. And so anyway, I think all of that idea of vulnerability and fatigue, it's all just a part and parcel of
human
this,
experience.
of if you're in this space of climate change and disasters.
Let's go to the actual pulling all the data together. I mean, not the detail of it, but so at the end of the workshops, at each workshop, we had a phenomenal amount of data, imagery, insight, anecdotes, huge amount. And I know Deb O'Connell led the work brilliantly on synthesizing all of that and pulling together the technical papers for CSIRO. And then I know Monica Bushman, who was working with me, my other secondee and right arm. Monica played a role in that too. So for the two of us to come together from different angles, to me it felt like, and that's why I sort of call myself the translator-in-chief a little bit as well, because of my deep experience and knowledge with the emergency management sector, policy sector, and then bringing the science and all three together. I felt like I was the translator of the scientific knowledge base with the practical side of things, and then merging that, massaging it, shaping it into what a policy context would look like. I know that was quite an interesting experience from both sides, like us looking at the technical way that the information was presented, and I suspect the way you guys needed to think about presenting it in a policy context. Any thoughts on that yourself of that sort of translation?
It was
so I think it's a critical point of what everyone has to do these days, really, to
it was really important. I mean, there are a whole lot of dimensions. That's why I'm struggling to know where to start. But I mean, I suppose we had to be, the way in which we pulled all of that together really needed to be informed about the kinds of outcomes we were trying to achieve. And one of the things that you and Mark were really emphasizing was the need to, the importance of narratives, and the need to shift the narratives, or to enhance the narratives around disasters and
what's at stake.
And the shift away from disaster, this idea of disasters being a natural event, and so that demanded a whole lot of additional work of the science to say, well, how do we bring in credible, scientifically underpinned evidence into storylines and narratives that people saw as legitimate and were and helped shift that thinking around and behaviors that we knew we desperately needed. I think the other thing that was really a key insight was as scientists and we're system scientists in particular, we engage in the complexity because that's really important. But if you want to be policy relevant, it has to be simple. And one of the things that I think I learned a lot from Mark Crossweller was how, and he would spend a lot of time with us. We didn't remember, we would have those meetings for hours, philosophy and philosophical and ethical and really exploring, well, what's the essence here? There's all this complexity. What is the key essence? And a big part of that was because it was actually important for us to get this bipartisan support. And there was a fair amount of contestation at the time around climate change, quite a hostile environment around climate change ideas. And so the job of work was to make sure that we were true to the complexity, acknowledged climate change, and did it simply and got bipartisan support for it. And I think that was you couldn't do that without working with policymakers and science in a deliberative way. It was really exciting.
I remember some words that I think Mark might have said them, that the narrative, whichever angle, whichever way you come at it, rings true. So that was what we strove for at the end of synthesising all of that data and information, whichever angle we came at it. Knowledge, rules and values rang true. And I've been reflecting on that recently as well. And that has not changed. I mean, the narrative, whoever talks about it, whichever way angle you get, it still rings true, that everything is still valid in that work right now.
I get really excited because people we still work with today, or new projects, they go back to the AVP. They draw on it.
So this is the payoff, isn't it? This is the payoff of all of that hard work, all of that effort, all of that intellect. And I'm talking the 1,000-odd people, a couple of thousand people that ultimately participated in the final, in the final process and giving us the insights. That's the value and the payoff, isn't it? The champions of change are still out there. Yeah. One of the things that I wouldn't mind talking about too is decision makers. You touched on them earlier about, and from the way I'm sort of thinking about it is when you talk about risk, who creates it in the first place was often a catchphrase of, well, wait a minute, well, who is it that made the decision in the first place? And then why is it that the least or the most vulnerable end up wearing the consequence? So that we navigated that round and round and round a lot, didn't we? And I was struck with going to a couple of other workshops where involving the banking sector and the financial sector, and just sort of quietly asking questions around the people who are managing wealth funds and insurance arrangements, and asking them how they go about assessing the risk, and to what extent do they think about systemic disaster risk. And the base was really low in terms of their knowledge. That really shook me. I mean, it was not unexpected, but it sort of really shook me that in the world of trillion-dollar investments, potentially, the knowledge base was really low. And getting the right mechanisms in place to change that became part of the focus of the National Resilience Framework as well.
Yes.
Because we knew we had to try and impart some of this knowledge into that sector. And hence the work that you are now still leading with CSIRO. What's shifted, do you think, from maybe my own personal thoughts about the low base is what's shifted in that world of decision makers that and investment that is part of the payoff of the whole project, I suppose, as well.
I think, what we were trying to achieve through the AVP was catalyzing a much more proactive approach to risk reduction. And not just proactive, but systemic. And so what I would say where we are now with the private sector, which are much more aware of climate risks. And unfortunately though, I would probably say that a lot of that awareness is more because of the catastrophic events that have played out that we kind of said were going to play out.
Yeah.
And even though I think, we came out with a very progressive national disaster risk reduction framework and strategic guidance on supporting decision making, and a vulnerability profile and a narrative, I still feel that the actual translation into policy and practice changes hasn't played out the way we would have hoped, and and the actual reactions that the actions now of the private sector are largely because the costs are now so massive, and the evidence
which we warned them to.
Yeah, absolutely. It was all. So I think, in a sense, we kind of knew this was going to happen, but and so that does raise questions. Notwithstanding all the positives of the work, the actual policy translation in a highly politically contested, resource-constrained, highly disruptive environment where people are continually grappling with everyday challenges and issues. How do we do this more systemic change, proactive change? It's really challenging.
You believe it's been nearly 9 years since we did the AVP. What have you been up to since then? And I know you've already mentioned it a couple of times about you draw on the, what we developed for that project often. So what have you been working on since then? And, any other thoughts about the pickup and the use of the AVP by others that you've observed?
So the work that we have continued with after that AVP has, we really have tried to focus on the investment challenge, and so we created the Enabling Resilience Investment Initiative. It has elements which are fundamentally about helping people just diagnose the causes of vulnerabilities, and the kinds of interventions that are required to address those. But one of the things that we really focus on now is this idea that avoided costs, which is a big part of the argument that we're trying to get through, is that the costs are going to be substantial if we don't do anything proactively or don't do enough proactively. So we need to then demonstrate that if you did certain things, you could avoid those costs. Now, we've found that that's not a very strong argument for investment, because those costs are delayed, and which means that the benefits from that get discounted. The benefits are very diffuse. They spread across lots of different stakeholders, and so therefore very difficult to quantify, but also to say, well, the person that has to invest, they need to know what the benefit is to them. And because they're highly uncertain, it means that people just say, well, You can't demonstrate it, therefore we're not so sure it's worthwhile doing. So what we've been trying to do is complement that with this idea that there is a whole lot of benefit that can be realized quite early on through resilience and through creating opportunities that create value as the other side of the coin for your investment case. And so a lot of the work now has been to partner with stakeholders, predominantly local governments, because
they've got the toughest job.
Yeah, absolutely. And hazards obviously play out in place, and disasters are experienced in place. So it's working with local governments and groups of local governments, because their coordinated efforts is fundamental to build resilience. And it's helping them identify opportunities for investment that also will only be possible if they manage the risk. So it incentivizes a wider set of stakeholders to come together to invest in this issue of disaster risk reduction. And so we now have different projects around the country focused on just that. And so we've been working in BW to help them, because they've experienced
horrendous flooding.
I think about 30 disaster events in about 4 or 5 years.
30?
Yeah, it's a combination of bushfires and floods and landslides. And all this,
yeah, I didn't realise it was that many.
Yeah. So and they're really struggling to access the funding and finance to actually rebuild all their road networks, etc. So we've been working closely with them to develop these new capabilities that can help with that. We're working on projects with the telecommunications sector to help build telecommunication resilience. And we recently worked in the Illawarra Shoalhaven, again, applying pretty much similar approach to the vulnerability profiling work. And that was focused on how we can identify locations that are appropriate for delivering safe and affordable housing, and in the context of increasing disaster risks. So yeah, it's all of that capability. We're applying it in these different contexts to try and form the basis for coalitions to come together with an investment, an incentive to invest in risk reduction that creates value that people will then benefit from in regions. So that's been the work that we've been doing.
Where could people find more information out about that, Russ? What you do?
Yeah, we do have a website.
Got some more,
Yeah, it is called the Enabling Resilience Investment.
I'll post that up.
And I suppose another part of our work really is continually just talking about the work, doing the brokering, because what we are finding is that people are increasingly starting to pick this kind of work up. And ADA, through ADA and your your systemic risk
handbook.
I
think they're going to do the next iteration of that.
Okay. So I actually think there's a much wider appreciation of the need to be thinking about this in a more systemic way and building those coalitions to address them. And so, I think that's
terrific. That's really good.
I mean, one of the things I also wasn't sure when to talk about, but was that idea of values and how what we value before a disaster.
That crossed my mind before as well.
After it, it
changes, doesn't it? We learned that loud and clear through all the conversations.
One of the biggest things, wasn't it? And the idea that we take so much. If you're in a period of stability, or if you haven't had that disruption or disaster, there's a lot that you take for granted, always given. And so a lot of your daily priorities and what you think is important might be, what you look like, or or the car you buy, or all these material things, or and it's when that suddenly gets and just in fact the fact that you have fresh air. or you've got fresh water. To me, that bushfire in 2019, 2020, where we had to wear masks for months and months and months. Values are highly contingent on your environment and if we're moving into a state where things are going to get a lot more challenging and we are going to experience more mega fires and we are going to lose biodiversity and we are going to start to have these things that we've always thought would be there starting to be questioned. And the other thing around that is that community, that sense of your relationships and the wider community, etc., the importance of all of that moving into these increasingly disruptive environments. I think it was a really important insight, I think, that came out of the
community connection was in neon lights, how important it is. Yeah. Okay, well,
cool.
This has been fabulous. It's such a trip down memory lane. And it's so heartening to see that your work on the sustainability initiative, financial initiative, is where it's at. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing the sort of really ramp up and hit the ground running with it.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. It's going very well. I could go on forever. So
maybe we'll do another session one day, Russ, about it. I'm sure someone will snap you up for us. Are you presenting on it around the country and doing, because you're such a good speaker?
Yeah, thank you.
You are.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a few things lined up.
Great.
Yeah, presenting at the ESP conference up in Darwin in June.
ESP.
It's the Ecosystems Sciences program. It's a global one, and I'll be talking there on the values, rules, knowledge perspective and how that can help diagnose barriers and challenges to investment in nature-based solutions for disaster risk reduction and resilience. I've got hosting a session at the Transformations Conference, which will be presenting the work that we did in the Illawarra Shoalhaven on diagnosing the exposure and vulnerability of existing communities to
Transformation Conference?
It's a global conference that recognizes that changes we're experiencing such novel and such large-scale changes that our responses, instead of trying to preserve and defend the status quo and business as usual, requires that we need to be a bit consider transforming the ways in which we develop, the ways in which we incentivize certain types of economic activities, etc. So it's a community of practice, global, that is trying to understand what are the kinds of more transformational changes that we need to be undertaking or preparing for or enabling, because we're going to be experiencing significantly disruptive change.
Sounds like one to really watch out for.
So we're presenting on the adaptation pathways work that we did in the Illawarra Shoalhaven to get where people were confronted with large change that was likely to happen and reflecting on whether they could continue to live in these places and how much disruption they were willing to tolerate. And if they felt that it was necessary to relocate, would they be willing to relocate? What would be the things that, what kind of compensation mechanisms do we need to have in place? How do we fund that? How do we create the receiving environments for relocation?
That sounds fascinating.
So we'll be talking
and so important, because it's going to become more and more necessary.
But that when you start talking about things like that, it's
it's very confronting for them.
It's very confronting. People have to and not just community, but it's a massive thing for government and for industry. And it's, if you're in that situation, there's huge cost.
And you can't rely on the government to be able to bail you out because, I mean, the government is taxpayer money, of course. So that's not always going to be possible into the future. So a lot of people, I have seen and heard them when they know that they're living in, for example, on the coast, the sea level rise, properties are going to be inundated. It'll be okay. You know, the government will bail us out. That's a huge gamble to take, isn't it?
And we know in a lot of the, absolutely, and we know in a lot of these places, they can no longer get insurance. And so if it's not government, and it's definitely not the private sector, because they're not providing insurance anymore, who is it then? And in many ways, you know, we have got innovative ways of creating investments and funds that ensure we have the money when we need it, but we're not setting those up sufficiently quickly because unfortunately I think we're going to need huge amounts of investment down the track to be able to accommodate these changes. So we'll be talking about that at the Transformations Conference.
Sounds fantastic.
And I've got a couple of there's the Adaptation Futures Conference coming up later this year. So I'm hoping to talk with some international people that are also grappling with a lot of these issues around investment. And so, lots of opportunities for me to present this work with other people that are grappling with it. So it's exciting, but
daunting.
Daunting.
Yeah, but the more traction it can get, the better. Yeah. Well, Russ, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you
so much for spending time with me here in Canberra.
Thank you so much.
The wind's getting up, the motorbikes were revving, the kids were playing. It's been fun.